Number 1. Judy Buenoano. Judy Buenoano, often referred to as Florida's Black Widow, was a woman whose charm masked a deadly ambition. Her crimes began to unfold in the early 1980s, but the seeds had been planted long before. She was convicted of multiple murders, including her husband, her paralyzed son, and a boyfriend, all in pursuit of insurance money. Each death was initially ruled as tragic and unrelated, until investigators began to notice a chilling pattern. Judy's husband, James Goodyear, was a sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. After returning from Vietnam, he suddenly fell ill and died. The cause was believed to be natural, but within months Judy collected a life insurance payout. Years later, her son Michael, who had become partially paralyzed, mysteriously drowned while canoeing. Once again, Judy benefited financially. She would go on to poison another boyfriend with arsenic, following a similar routine, gain their trust, take out life insurance, and wait. What made Judy especially feared wasn't just the number of victims, but the cold and calculated nature of her actions. She often appeared composed and caring on the outside, all while orchestrating deaths behind the scenes. Her ability to manipulate those around her, from doctors to insurance agents to her own family, left a trail of suspicion that eventually caught up with her. The turning point came when a surviving victim, John Gentry, reported strange symptoms after taking pills Judy had given him. A subsequent investigation revealed she had laced his capsules with arsenic. This discovery unraveled the web of lies and led police to re-examine the other deaths connected to her. Forensic tests confirmed arsenic poisoning in both her husband and son, and the motive was clear: money. In 1985, Judy was sentenced to death for the murder of her son and received additional sentences for the murders of her husband and boyfriend. On March 30th, 1998, she became the first woman executed in Florida since 1848. The method? The electric chair. She showed no emotion in her final moments, offering no last words. Judy Buenoano's story continues to shock those who learn about her. A woman who used love, trust, and loyalty as tools for murder. Behind the soft-spoken demeanor was a ruthless killer who stopped at nothing to get what she wanted. Her crimes forever changed how authorities look at so-called accidents involving sudden illness or drowning, especially when insurance money is involved. Number 2. Kimberly McCarthy. Kimberly McCarthy was once a respected occupational therapist, but her life spiraled into darkness, ending with her becoming one of Texas's most notorious female killers. Her story is a disturbing blend of addiction, deception, and violence that stunned both law enforcement and the public. Born in 1961, McCarthy appeared to lead a promising life. She earned a degree in occupational therapy and worked with patients in nursing homes. But behind the professional exterior, she struggled with a crack cocaine addiction that would soon define the course of her life. The grip of substance abuse began to consume her, leading her into a cycle of desperation and criminal activity. Her most infamous crime occurred on July 21, 1997, in Lancaster, Texas. Her victim was 71-year-old retired college professor Dorothy Booth, a kind and trusting woman who lived just across the street. McCarthy knew her, which is why Dorothy opened her door without hesitation. Kimberly used that familiarity to her advantage. She entered Booth's home under the pretense of borrowing some sugar. Once inside, the situation quickly turned deadly. Kimberly brutally attacked Booth, stabbing her multiple times and ultimately cutting off her finger to steal her diamond ring. She also took Dorothy's purse and car, pawning the ring and using the money to buy drugs shortly after. This cold and calculated act of violence was not McCarthy's first brush with the law. She had prior arrests and was even linked to the murders of two other elderly women in the 1980s, Maggie Harding and Jetty Lucas. Though never convicted in those cases, similarities in the methods and circumstances raised chilling suspicions. In the Booth case, investigators quickly connected the dots. Evidence at the scene, including fingerprints and pawnshop records, pointed straight to McCarthy. She was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death in 1998. The brutality of the murder and the vulnerability of her victim shocked the jury, who unanimously agreed on the death penalty. But the legal journey didn't end there. Over the next 15 years, McCarthy remained on death row, appealing her case on various grounds. Her attorneys argued that her addiction and mental health issues played a major role in the crime and that she hadn't received adequate legal representation during her trial. However, the courts repeatedly upheld her conviction. What set McCarthy apart was not just the crime, but the unsettling contrast between who she once was and who she became. She was articulate and intelligent, yet capable of extraordinary violence. Interviews and court documents revealed a woman who had lost control, consumed by a desperate need to fuel her addiction at any cost. In January 2013, McCarthy came within hours of execution, but received a temporary stay due to procedural questions. However, her time eventually ran out. On June 26, 2013, she was executed by lethal injection at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. She was 52 years old. Her final moments were calm. She declined to make a final statement, but moments before the drugs were administered, she reportedly said a brief prayer. McCarthy was the 500th person executed by the state of Texas since capital punishment resumed in 1982, a grim milestone that drew national and international attention. Kimberly McCarthy's case reignited debates about the death penalty, addiction, and how society should deal with individuals who commit heinous crimes under the influence of substance abuse. Some saw her as a cold-blooded killer, while others viewed her as a tragic figure destroyed by drugs and circumstance. What remains undeniable is the pain left behind. Dorothy Booth's family never recovered from the horror of her death, and for many, Kimberly McCarthy will forever be remembered not for who she once was, but for the savage act that sealed her fate and her place in U.S. prison history. Cleopatra MacDonald. In the shadowy streets of Detroit, one name still echoes with dread. Cleopatra MacDonald, known by her street name, Patra. Her nickname conjured images of power and royalty, but her reign was marked by fear, brutality, and cold-blooded murder. The name Patra didn't just make headlines. It made witnesses disappear and rival gang members sleep with one eye open. Cleopatra MacDonald's early life didn't hint at the darkness to come. Those who knew her as a child remembered a quiet, intelligent girl who loved drawing and rarely got into trouble. Raised in a troubled part of Detroit, she was the middle child in a family that struggled to stay afloat. Her mother worked 2 jobs, and her father had long disappeared. As poverty and violence closed in, Cleopatra transformed. She stopped being the protective sister and became the one others feared. By her teen years, Cleopatra was running with one of Detroit's most dangerous street crews. She quickly gained a reputation not just for her loyalty, but for her terrifying efficiency. She was smart, calculating, and always 10 steps ahead. Unlike many others in her circle, Patra didn't just rely on muscle. She used her mind. She knew who to silence, who to bribe, and who to eliminate. But everything spiraled out of control in 2013. Patra had been in a long-term relationship with a man known in the streets as T. Rumors began circulating that he was feeding information to law enforcement, possibly cooperating in exchange for reduced charges. For Cleopatra, betrayal wasn't just personal. It was fatal. She couldn't afford to let anyone make her look weak. And so, she began to plan. She lured T to an abandoned property, pretending she wanted to work things out. Once there, she turned the tables. 2 of her crew members, both heavily armed, ambushed him. What followed was a scene too brutal for most to stomach. Over the course of several hours, T was beaten, burned, and tortured. Patra didn't just orchestrate it, she led it. Witnesses said she was calm, methodical, and entirely remorseless. In the end, she personally delivered the fatal stab wounds and reportedly whispered, "You should have stayed loyal." The body was dumped, but Cleopatra wasn't done. When investigators raided one of her known hideouts, they found chilling evidence: handwritten lists of names, nicknames, gang affiliations, and notes beside each one. It appeared to be a hit list. Some were marked off, some were circled, others were labeled next. Detectives quickly realized this wasn't just about one murder. This was the blueprint of a queen pin cleaning house. Despite her tight grip on the streets, Patra's world began to crack. A former associate, facing serious prison time, agreed to testify. Even then, law enforcement feared he wouldn't survive long enough to reach court. Rumors spread that Cleopatra had ordered hits from behind bars, and though unconfirmed, several witnesses disappeared or recanted statements. When her trial began, the courtroom was packed, but silent. Cleopatra MacDonald walked in wearing a tailored suit, her hair styled, her expression unreadable. Throughout the proceedings, she rarely showed emotion. Prosecutors painted her as the mastermind of a criminal network who used fear as her currency. They called her a modern-day mob boss, only more vicious. Her defense argued she was a victim of circumstance, shaped by a violent environment. But the evidence was overwhelming. She was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple gang-related felonies. The judge didn't hold back. During sentencing, he said, "You've manipulated, terrorized, and executed. You've shown no remorse. You are a danger to society in its purest form." Cleopatra was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, Cleopatra Patra MacDonald is incarcerated at the Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Michigan. Even in prison, her name carries weight. Inmates speak her name in hushed tones, and some correctional officers admit she still exudes control. Her story is one of transformation, of a bright young girl who evolved into one of Detroit's most feared figures. It forces us to ask, how much does the environment shape the criminal, and how far can someone go once power becomes their only purpose? Cleopatra's name is no longer on the streets, but her legend, dark and brutal, still walks the corridors of prison and memory. Number 4. Tasha L. Bates. Tasha L. Bates's crime was so haunting, it echoed across Tennessee and remains one of the darkest cases involving a mother in recent memory. On a scorching summer day in June 2012, something unthinkable happened in Morristown, Tennessee. 2 young children, 3-year-old Savannah and 5-year-old Xavian, were left in a sweltering car for over 7 hours, with the windows up and the temperature outside nearing 100 degrees Fahrenheit. When emergency services were finally called, it was too late. Both children were dead, their small bodies succumbing to extreme heat inside the vehicle. The mother responsible? Tasha Bates. What made this tragedy even more disturbing was the reason behind it. Tasha and her then-boyfriend, Kelvin L. White, had driven to a friend's house earlier that day. But instead of taking the children inside or arranging proper care, they locked the car and went inside to smoke marijuana, watch movies, and hang out, leaving the 2 toddlers alone in the blistering heat. According to reports, they even fell asleep for hours, completely unaware or uninterested in the dangerous situation they'd created. When Bates finally returned to the car and opened the door, she was met with a nightmare. The children were unresponsive. Rather than call 911 immediately, she and White attempted to cool the kids down with water and rushed them to a hospital. But the damage had been done. Both children died from hyperthermia, a slow, agonizing death caused by extreme heat exposure. Investigators soon pieced together the timeline, and what they found painted a devastating picture of neglect. It wasn't just a careless mistake. It was criminal. Witnesses said the car had been parked in direct sunlight with no shade, and the children had not been checked on once during those 7 hours. During questioning, Tasha showed little emotion, and her explanations lacked remorse or urgency. Prosecutors were appalled. The public reaction was immediate and emotional. Media outlets across the country picked up the story. People questioned how a mother could abandon her children so recklessly. Was it drugs, irresponsibility, or a complete absence of maternal instinct? Many labeled her evil. Some even called for the death penalty. But what stood out most was the sheer avoidability of it all. 2 innocent children lost their lives for nothing. At trial, Tasha Bates pleaded guilty to 2 counts of felony murder and 2 counts of aggravated child abuse. The judge, visibly emotional during sentencing, made it clear this was one of the most painful cases the court had ever handled. Bates was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. She's currently incarcerated at the Tennessee Prison for Women. The memory of Savannah and Xavier still haunts the community. Advocates for child safety use the tragedy to promote awareness around hot car deaths and the dangers of drug-impaired parenting. But for those closest to the children, no campaign or law can fill the silence they left behind. Tasha L. Bates's story isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest danger to a child doesn't come from strangers or accidents. It comes from the very person meant to protect them. Number 5. Tina Brown. In the early 2000s, a horrifying crime unfolded in Pensacola, Florida, one that would leave a permanent scar on the community and land a woman named Tina Brown in prison for the rest of her life. The details were so brutal, so calculated, that even seasoned investigators struggled to grasp the cruelty behind it. Tina Brown wasn't a stranger to her victim. She was a friend, or so it seemed. But underneath the surface, jealousy, resentment, and manipulation brewed until it exploded into one of the most vicious murders the city had ever seen. Tina Brown, along with her co-conspirators Heather Lee and Quinton Jones, orchestrated a plan to murder 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman, a young mother with a bright future ahead of her. Adriana had reportedly been living with Brown at the time, and tensions had been rising. There were whispers of betrayal, jealousy over relationships, and underlying conflicts that no one had fully seen coming. But no one imagined it would lead to what happened next. On the night of March 24, 2010, Adriana was lured into a car under the guise of a simple drive. Tina Brown sat calmly in the vehicle as her 2 accomplices joined her, masking their deadly intentions with fake smiles and small talk. They drove to a remote wooded area in Ensley, far from any help or witnesses. What happened next was pure savagery. The group dragged Adriana from the car and began their attack. They beat her viciously with a tire iron and a crowbar, showing no mercy. As Adriana cried and begged for her life, the group continued their brutal assault, eventually pouring gasoline over her and setting her on fire, while she was still alive. By the time authorities found her, it was too late. The young mother was dead, her body barely recognizable. The crime scene was gruesome, a forest clearing scorched and stained with violence. Investigators were stunned not just by the act, but by the complete lack of remorse shown by the killers. Tina Brown was arrested shortly after, along with Heather Lee and Quinton Jones. In court, the testimonies revealed a chilling insight into Tina's character. Witnesses described her as the ringleader, the one who organized and directed the murder. Heather Lee, who eventually cooperated with law enforcement, testified that Brown had expressed a desire to kill Zimmerman days before the attack. Brown believed Zimmerman had disrespected her and wanted revenge in the most horrifying way possible. During the trial, prosecutors laid out a detailed and disturbing timeline. They emphasized Tina Brown's leadership in the planning and execution of the murder. Despite the emotional testimonies from Adriana's family, her mother in particular pleading for justice, Tina remained cold, rarely showing emotion. In 2012, Tina Brown was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She is currently incarcerated in a Florida state prison, where she will likely remain for the rest of her life. Her co-defendants also received lengthy sentences, though none matched the severity of Brown's. What makes Tina Brown's case so haunting is not just the brutality, but the betrayal. Adriana Zimmerman trusted her, lived with her, saw her as a friend, and in return, she was lured into a trap, tortured and murdered in one of the most callous acts imaginable. It's a story that still echoes in Pensacola, a warning about the darkness that can hide behind familiar faces. This case also brought attention to how group violence can unfold with one dominant personality, like Tina, manipulating others into carrying out unthinkable acts. It exposed flaws in how domestic disputes and personal feuds are handled and reignited conversations about the dangers of unresolved tensions among young people. Over a decade has passed since that horrifying night in the woods, but for Adriana's family, time hasn't dulled the pain. Every year they gather to remember her, a daughter, a mother, a life stolen too soon. And every year, Tina Brown's name resurfaces as a reminder of what she took away. Number 6. Pamela Moss. Pamela Moss's descent into darkness is one of the most disturbing stories in the world of criminal psychology. Her name may not be as widely recognized as some other female killers, but her crime shocked those who heard it, not because it was a frenzied act of passion, but because it was deliberate, calculated, and centered around the one person she was supposed to protect, her own daughter. Born in the United States in the mid-1960s, Pamela Moss was once a promising student and aspiring nurse. She had a seemingly normal upbringing, did well academically, and appeared to have a future in the medical field. However, life didn't unfold the way she expected. Struggles with mental health, a failed marriage, and increasing instability chipped away at her grip on reality. Pamela had a daughter named Nicole, whom she raised mostly on her own after her divorce. Neighbors described her as quiet, but odd. She was known to isolate herself and Nicole, keeping a tight and sometimes overly controlling grip on her daughter's life. Over time, Pamela's behavior grew more erratic. She believed people were spying on her. She thought her food was being poisoned. The line between reality and delusion began to blur, and her obsession with control turned into something sinister. By the early 2000s, Pamela had fully spiraled. She had become obsessed with the idea that Nicole, now a teenager, was pulling away from her, becoming distant, and possibly even conspiring against her. Instead of recognizing her own mental health issues, Pamela projected all her paranoia onto Nicole. In her delusional mind, eliminating her daughter would somehow solve her unraveling life. On July 4, 2006, Pamela Moss committed an act so shocking it left law enforcement and the public stunned. She killed Nicole in their Rochester, New York home, in a manner that was both calculated and haunting. Pamela sedated Nicole with a mix of over-the-counter medications, ensuring the teen wouldn't be able to fight back. Then, using tools she had carefully prepared in advance, she suffocated and dismembered her daughter's body in the bathtub. What makes this case especially chilling is that Pamela seemed entirely methodical about the act, cold and detached, almost like she was following a routine. After the murder, Pamela didn't try to flee. Instead, she attempted to take her own life by overdosing on medication. But she failed. When police entered the home, they found Pamela semi-conscious and the remains of her daughter nearby. The bathroom was a scene of unimaginable horror. Investigators quickly realized this wasn't a case of a sudden snap or heat-of-the-moment violence. This had been planned. Pamela was taken into custody and placed under psychiatric evaluation. Her defense attorneys argued that she was deeply mentally ill and had suffered from untreated paranoid schizophrenia for years. Multiple psychiatrists agreed that she was legally insane at the time of the murder. Pamela claimed that she didn't remember killing her daughter and insisted she was trying to protect her from a world full of evil forces. In court, the debate wasn't whether Pamela Moss killed Nicole. It was whether she was mentally competent to stand trial. The courtroom was tense. Nicole's surviving family members and friends sat through disturbing details about how Pamela had planned the murder and what she had done after. There were tears, disbelief, and quiet anger. Pamela, during the hearings, appeared distant and unemotional. At times, she mumbled to herself or stared blankly ahead. Ultimately, the court found Pamela Moss not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of a prison sentence, she was committed to a secure psychiatric facility, where she remains to this day. Doctors continue to monitor and treat her, but she is considered too dangerous and unstable to ever be released back into society. Nicole's death sent shockwaves through the community. She was remembered as a bright, kind girl who loved music and had dreams of going to college. Her school held vigils, and her classmates wrote messages of grief and love that still linger online. For many, the question remains, how did no one see the warning signs? Pamela's paranoia, her delusions, and her strange behavior had been noted by some, but no action was taken in time to save Nicole. This case has become a haunting example of the consequences of untreated mental illness. It also sparked conversations about how the mental health system can sometimes fail families, especially when a person is unwilling or unable to recognize that they need help. Pamela Moss remains confined in a New York psychiatric institution, likely for the rest of her life. Her name is not often mentioned among the most infamous female killers, but her actions, and the betrayal of her own child, place her among the most feared and disturbing. Nicole's memory lives on through the heartbreak of her loved ones and the haunting reminder of what happens when delusion turns deadly. In the end, Pamela Moss's story is not just about a horrific crime, but about a system that missed the signs until it was far too late. Number 7. Renisha Thomas. Renisha Thomas's name may not echo as loudly as other infamous killers, but the horror of what she did continues to haunt those who came across her case. Her crime wasn't just brutal, it was deeply personal, carried out in a moment of blind rage and emotional collapse that left a child dead and a community reeling. Born and raised in Louisiana, Renisha Thomas had a troubled past from early on. She grew up in a household marked by instability and conflict. Her relationship with her mother was strained, and as she got older, Renisha seemed to carry those emotional scars with her. She struggled with maintaining healthy relationships, had frequent outbursts, and was known by many to have a temper that could flare without warning. By her early 20s, Renisha was a mother herself. In 2009, she was living with her boyfriend and his 3-year-old son, Jashawn Powell, in Baton Rouge. Friends said Renisha wanted to be seen as a mother figure to the boy, but behind closed doors, her treatment of Jashawn was far from maternal. While outwardly presenting as a supportive partner, she had begun showing signs of controlling behavior and anger toward the child. On November 4, 2009, everything unraveled in the most tragic way. That day, Renisha had been home alone with Jashawn while his father was at work. According to later testimony, Renisha lost her temper because the boy had an accident in his pants. What followed was an outburst of unimaginable violence. She struck the child repeatedly. When her rage wasn't satisfied, she placed Jashawn in a bathtub and submerged his body underwater. The exact details of what happened in those final moments remain harrowing, but by the time paramedics arrived, the 3-year-old was unresponsive. Despite efforts to save him, Jashawn was pronounced dead shortly after at the hospital. The medical examiner revealed extensive bruising across his body, signs of long-term abuse, and cause of death as drowning combined with blunt force trauma. The brutality stunned even veteran investigators. What horrified many was the fact that Renisha didn't call for help right away. Instead, She attempted to cover up what she had done, delaying the emergency response by precious minutes. Police arrested her that same night. During questioning, renee initially gave inconsistent accounts, claiming the child had fallen. But under pressure and mounting evidence, she eventually admitted to physically assaulting Jashawn and holding him underwater. Her trial in 2011 revealed a deeply broken individual who had harbored unchecked rage and emotional instability. The prosecution painted her as a woman consumed by control and jealousy, angry that Jashawn took up so much of her boyfriend's time and affection. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity and emotional instability, but it was clear to the jury that renee's actions were intentional and sustained. The courtroom was packed with community members, family, and child welfare advocates. Jashawn's relatives gave gut-wrenching testimonies about his loving personality, how he loved to sing, and how he was beginning to learn his ABCs. The room wept when photos of the smiling boy were shown side by side with his post-mortem injuries. Renee Thomas was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge made it clear that the calculated cruelty of the crime left no room for leniency. Now imprisoned in Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, renee has remained mostly silent since her sentencing. She has not granted interviews, and she has never publicly expressed remorse. Some reports suggest she has been placed in solitary confinement, at times due to behavioral issues within the prison system. The legacy of her crime remains with those who knew Jashawn. His death sparked local protests, demanding better protections for children in cohabiting households and increased background checks for adult caregivers. The Department of Children and Family Services came under fire after reports emerged that the family had previous contact with social workers, but no firm actions had been taken. This case stands as a tragic reminder that warning signs often go unheeded. Neighbors had reported hearing yelling. Family members noticed bruises but chalked them up to clumsiness. It wasn't until it was too late that the true extent of the abuse came to light. renee Thomas's name may never become as widely known as some serial killers or famous inmates, but in the world of true crime, her act is a haunting symbol of how unchecked anger and emotional turmoil can lead to unspeakable tragedy. A young life was stolen, not by a stranger, but by someone who was supposed to protect him. In that betrayal, renee carved her place in the dark annals of U.S. prison history. Number 8. Marissa DeVault. Marissa DeVault's case is one of the most perplexing and brutal murder cases in Arizona's recent history. A story of financial desperation, deceit, and a horrific killing that stunned both investigators and the public. What makes her crime so haunting is not just the violence involved, but the chilling, calculated decisions that followed. Marissa was a 36-year-old mother of 3 living in the Phoenix suburb of Gilbert, Arizona. On the surface, she lived a quiet suburban life with her husband, Dale Harrell, and their children. To outsiders, they seemed like a normal family. But behind closed doors, things were far from ordinary. Their marriage was deeply troubled. Financial stress loomed heavily over them, and Marissa was quietly sinking into a web of debt, lies, and emotional instability. On the morning of January 14, 2009, a frantic 911 call came from Marissa. She told the dispatcher that her husband had been attacked by an intruder while he slept. When police arrived, they found Dale barely clinging to life. His skull fractured, face swollen, and head caved in from multiple blows with a heavy object. He was taken to the hospital but fell into a coma and died a few weeks later. Initially, Marissa stuck to her story. She claimed a masked man had entered their home and attacked Dale, then fled. But inconsistencies in her account raised red flags. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing had been stolen. Investigators grew suspicious and began digging into the couple's background, and what they uncovered painted a disturbing picture. Soon, Marissa confessed, there had been no intruder. She admitted that she had attacked Dale herself with a hammer while he slept. The reason she gave was shocking. She claimed years of physical abuse and said the attack was an act of self-defense, a desperate move to free herself from a violent relationship. But her version of events didn't match the physical evidence, and prosecutors believed there was something much darker at play. Investigators discovered that Marissa had a secret. She was involved with another man, a wealthy older benefactor named Alan Flores. She had received over $12,000 from him in the months leading up to the murder and had convinced him to name her the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. But more importantly, they found that Dale had a $300,000 life insurance policy, with Marissa listed as the sole beneficiary. The prosecution argued that Marissa's real motive was greed. They claimed she killed Dale to escape financial ruin and to cash in on his life insurance. To strengthen their case, they pointed to Marissa's behavior after the attack. Rather than calling for help immediately, she waited nearly 30 minutes before contacting authorities. That delay, they argued, was intentional. She had been calculating how to cover her tracks. Her trial began in early 2014 and captured national attention. Prosecutors painted her as a manipulative woman who used sex, lies, and sympathy to gain financial security. They presented evidence showing that Dale was attacked with at least 7 hammer blows to the head, an act far beyond self-defense. The medical examiner testified that the pattern and force of the injuries suggested rage and premeditation, not a sudden defensive act. Marissa's defense, meanwhile, focused on her history of mental illness and claimed that Dale had been abusive for years. They brought in witnesses who said they saw bruises on her body and heard stories of fights. But the jury didn't buy the argument. The brutality of the attack, combined with the financial motive and her multiple inconsistent statements, left little doubt in their minds. In April 2014, Marissa DeVault was convicted of first-degree murder. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, but after emotional arguments from her children, who asked the court to spare her life, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, Marissa remains behind bars in Arizona's Perryville prison. She has rarely spoken publicly since her sentencing and has not given interviews. Her case continues to be discussed in true crime forums and documentaries, not only for its gruesome details, but also for the questions it raises about motive, manipulation, and the lengths some people will go when trapped in desperation. What makes Marissa DeVault's story especially chilling is the calm, controlled way she tried to manipulate the aftermath of her husband's murder. From fabricating an intruder to trying to play the role of a grieving wife, she almost pulled off what could have been a perfect crime. But in the end, the truth couldn't stay buried. Her case is a haunting example of how darkness can lurk beneath the surface of suburban normalcy, and how love, when twisted by greed and desperation, can turn into something deadly. Number 9. LaShawn Harris. LaShawn Harris is one of the most tragic and haunting cases in the history of American crime. A story where mental illness, delusion, and deep personal suffering ended in the loss of 3 innocent lives. What makes this case especially disturbing is not just what happened, but how it could have been prevented, and the painful questions it left behind. LaShawn Harris, a 23-year-old woman from Oakland, California, had long battled schizophrenia and other serious mental health issues. She had been diagnosed years before and was under treatment, living with the support of her family and public mental health services. Those close to her were aware of her struggles. She often spoke of hearing voices, of receiving messages from God, and of having visions. But despite this, she was also a mother to 3 young sons, 6-year-old Treshawn, 2-year-old Taronta, and 1-year-old Joshua. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, there were warning signs. Harris had stopped taking her prescribed medications. She began speaking in increasingly bizarre and alarming ways, talking about demons, angels, and divine missions. Her family tried to get her help, but she slipped through the cracks of an overwhelmed mental health system. Her children remained in her care. Then came the horrific day, October 19th, 2005. That morning, Harris left her home and boarded a Bay Area rapid transit BART train headed for San Francisco with her 3 children. Surveillance cameras captured her calmly walking through the Embarcadero station, holding her youngest in her arms while the other 2 followed behind. Witnesses described her as appearing unusually serene, even peaceful. No one could have predicted what she was about to do. At the edge of the train platform, LaShawn began speaking quietly to her children. Then, without warning, she lifted her youngest child and dropped him onto the tracks. Moments later, she did the same to the others. Witnesses screamed. One bystander ran toward her, trying to stop her, but within seconds, a train approached. All 3 boys were struck and killed. Harris stood silently, watching, showing little emotion. When police arrived, Harris told them she was doing what God had told her to do. She said she believed her children were going to heaven and that they had no souls. Her statements were calm but chilling. Officers were left stunned, unsure if they were dealing with a murderer or someone entirely detached from reality. The case sent shockwaves through the nation. How could a mother commit such an unthinkable act? And more importantly, why hadn't anyone stopped her? As investigators pieced together Harris's history, it became clear that this was not a case of sudden madness, but a long, sad descent into untreated psychosis. Her family had repeatedly tried to get authorities to intervene. She had been hospitalized multiple times, yet, due to a combination of system failures, legal hurdles, and resource limitations, she was never deemed an imminent threat, until it was too late. Her trial in 2007 was complex. Prosecutors argued that, regardless of her mental health, Harris knew right from wrong. The defense countered that she was deeply schizophrenic, hallucinating, and completely unaware of the reality of her actions. Her belief that she was sending her children to a better place, they argued, wasn't malicious. It was the tragic result of a broken mind. Ultimately, the court found her guilty of second-degree murder but declared her legally insane. She was sentenced not to prison, but to a high-security psychiatric hospital, where she remains to this day under constant supervision. The story of LaShawn Harris isn't just about one mother's breakdown. It's about the failure of the systems meant to protect her, and more importantly, her children. It raised national conversations about mental health, child welfare, and the devastating consequences when people slip through the cracks. For many, the case is a haunting reminder of how untreated mental illness can lead to unimaginable outcomes. But for others, especially those who work in mental health advocacy, it's a call to do more, to build systems that don't just wait for tragedy, but actively prevent it. To this day, commuters pass through the Embarcadero station, unaware of the tragedy that occurred there. But those who remember LaShawn Harris's story still feel the pain of that day. A quiet, chilling moment that ended 3 young lives and left behind questions that may never be fully answered. Number 10. Chanel Lewis. Chanel Lewis's name became a lightning rod in one of New York City's most controversial and racially charged murder cases in recent memory. The crime shocked the public not only for its brutality, but also for the mystery surrounding it. How could a young woman jogging through a quiet park in broad daylight be attacked and killed so viciously? And how did the investigation lead to Chanel? On August 2nd, 2016, Karina Vetrano, a 30-year-old speech therapist and avid jogger, went for a run near her home in Howard Beach, Queens. She often jogged with her father, but on that fateful day, she went alone. Hours passed without her return, and panic quickly spread through her family. Her father, Phil Vetrano, joined the police in a desperate search. That evening, her body was discovered off a jogging trail in Spring Creek Park. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and left in a marshy area, her body hidden by tall weeds. The murder was as shocking as it was puzzling. Karina was a beloved member of her community. There was no sign of robbery, no apparent motive, and very little evidence initially pointing to a suspect. The NYPD launched an all-out investigation, canvassing the area, examining DNA, and releasing sketches and surveillance footage in the hopes of finding a lead. But months passed with no arrest. Public pressure mounted as the case became headline news across New York. Then, in February 2017, 6 months later, police announced a breakthrough. They had arrested 20-year-old Chanel Lewis, a young black man from East New York, Brooklyn. He had no prior criminal record but had a documented history of mental health issues and behavioral problems. Police stated that Chanel had voluntarily given a confession, describing in detail how he attacked Karina after getting into an argument with someone earlier in the day and going to the park to let out his anger. His DNA, investigators claimed, matched samples found under Karina's fingernails, on her neck, and on her phone. To authorities, this was a clear-cut case, but to many observers, especially those following the case closely, serious doubts and concerns began to emerge. The interrogation video, released later, showed Chanel being questioned for hours, alone and visibly confused. Some experts questioned the legitimacy of his confession, pointing out that individuals with cognitive limitations are more prone to coercion. His family insisted he was innocent and incapable of such violence. They claimed the police were desperate to solve a high-profile case and had targeted an easy scapegoat. During the first trial in 2018, the jury was deadlocked and a mistrial was declared. But a retrial followed in 2019, and this time, Chanel Lewis was found guilty of murder and sexual abuse. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the story didn't end there. Civil rights advocates, including the Innocence Project, raised concerns about racial bias, mishandling of evidence, and the lack of legal representation during initial questioning. They pointed out that DNA transfer could happen through indirect means, and his confession lacked specific details that only the killer would know. Additionally, some claimed that the police had focused on Chanel only after previously ignoring dozens of leads in what appeared to be a racially and socially influenced investigation. Others, however, stood firmly behind the verdict, citing the matching DNA and confession as proof of guilt. Karina Vetrano's family became outspoken advocates for justice, deeply believing in the police work that led to Lewis's arrest and conviction. They described Chanel as a predator who had randomly attacked their daughter, and they worked to support victims' rights in the aftermath. The case remains one of the most debated murder trials in recent New York history. For some, Chanel Lewis is a violent criminal who received the justice he deserved. For others, he is a young man with mental health challenges who was unfairly targeted by a system eager to close a difficult case. What's undeniable is the lasting impact on two families, one grieving the devastating loss of a beloved daughter, the other insisting on the innocence of their son. The tragedy shattered lives and divided a city already grappling with issues of race, policing, and justice. Today, Chanel Lewis continues to serve his life sentence in a New York State prison. Legal advocates have attempted to file appeals, and some are still working to reopen the case, arguing that justice requires a deeper look. But for now, the verdict stands, and the memory of Karina Vetrano lives on as a symbol of both the brutal crime that ended her life and the controversy that still surrounds the man convicted of taking it.